Welcome to the Unraveling the Scriptures channel. The Jewish people are one of the oldest and most fascinating groups in human history, carrying a cultural and genetic heritage that spans millennia. Among the main Jewish populations in Israel and around the world, three stand out in particular: Ashkenazi Jews, Sephardic Jews, and Mizrahi Jews. But what is the true origin of these groups? What sets them apart? And what secrets has genetic science uncovered about the lineage of the Jewish people over the centuries? In this video, we will dive into the history, migrations, and influences that shaped these three branches of Judaism. Get ready for an intriguing journey through the depths of Jewish genetics and culture. Before we begin, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share this content so more people can learn about this fascinating history. Now, let's unravel this mystery together. The Sephardic Jews, also known as Spanish Jews or Jews from the Iberian Peninsula, are a community of the Jewish diaspora historically associated with the Iberian Peninsula, which includes Spain and Portugal. The term Sephardic derives from the Hebrew word Sepharad, which literally means Iberia. Although the term can also refer to Jews from the Middle East and North Africa, it is most commonly associated with Jews from North Africa. In the Middle Eastern context, Jews from that region are often called Mizrahim, a Hebrew word meaning Eastern. Interestingly, Mizrahi Jews were deeply influenced by Sephardic customs over the centuries. After the expulsion of Jews from the Iberian Peninsula at the end of the 15th century, many families sought refuge in Jewish communities scattered across North Africa and the Middle East. This migration led to a process of cultural and ethnic integration, enriching both traditions and strengthening ties within the Jewish diaspora. Today, most Sephardic Jews reside in Israel, although there are significant communities spread across the world. A notable feature of this population is the preservation of the Ladino language, a fusion of Hebrew and medieval Spanish, and in some cases, Portuguese. Ladino is a unique linguistic and cultural heritage, reflecting the historical and cultural influences of the Sephardic Jews. It not only preserves the memories of a bygone era, but also symbolizes the resilience and adaptability of this group throughout history. The earliest documented presence of Jews in the Iberian Peninsula dates back to the Roman period in the early centuries of the Christian era. During this time, small Jewish communities began to establish themselves in the region, developing their religious and cultural practices. After facing periods of persecution under the Visigothic rule, Iberian Jews experienced a period of cultural and economic flourishing under Muslim rule in Al-Andalus, particularly after the Umayyad conquest. This era, often called the Golden Age, was marked by a productive coexistence between Jews and Arabs, allowing Jews to thrive in various fields such as science, philosophy, commerce, and the arts. However, this period of prosperity began to deteriorate with the Christian Reconquista. In 1492, the Alhambra decree, issued by the Catholic monarchs, led to the mass expulsion of Jews from Spain. A few years later, in 1496, King Manuel I of Portugal issued a similar decree, forcing not only Jews, but also Muslim Arabs to convert to Christianity or leave the kingdom. These measures caused large-scale migrations, forced conversions, and in many cases, persecutions and executions. By the end of the 15th century, the Sephardic community had been widely dispersed, with many Jews seeking refuge in North Africa, particularly the Maghreb, Western Asia, and Southern and Southeastern Europe. They also settled along important trade routes, such as the Silk Road, and founded or revitalized Jewish communities in various regions. During this period of diaspora, some Jews also emigrated to the Americas, including Brazil, where they came to be known as New Christians due to the forced conversions they had undergone. Historically, the vernacular languages of Sephardic Jews and their descendants included variants of Spanish, Portuguese, and Catalan. In many cases, these languages were adapted and incorporated into the local languages of the regions where Jews settled, resulting in a rich linguistic legacy. Additionally, as mentioned earlier, Ladino emerged as a unique fusion of medieval Spanish and Hebrew, preserving cultural and historical traits of this community over the centuries. The historical forms of Spanish spoken by the different Sephardic communities varied according to the time when these communities left the Iberian Peninsula and their social and religious status at the time of departure, whether as conversos, new Christians, or Jews. Judeo-Spanish and Judeo-Portuguese, often referred to as Ladino, are Romance languages derived from Old Spanish and Old Portuguese. These languages were widely used by Eastern Sephardic Jews who settled in the Eastern Mediterranean after the expulsion from Spain in 1492. The term Sephardic has its roots in the Hebrew word Sepharad or Sfarad, which is mentioned in biblical texts as a reference to a location whose historical and geographical identification has been widely debated. Over time, Sepharad became associated with the Iberian Peninsula, considered the westernmost point of Phoenician maritime trade in antiquity. There are theories suggesting that Jewish presence in the region dates back to the reign of King Solomon, but these claims lack concrete evidence. What is more widely accepted is that Jews arrived in the Iberian Peninsula during the Roman period, with archaeological evidence indicating Jewish communities already established in the 1st century CE. In the most restricted etymological and cultural definition, a Sephardic Jew is a descendant of the Jewish communities that inhabited the Iberian Peninsula in the late 15th century, immediately before the issuance of the Alhambra Decree in 1492, promulgated by the Catholic monarchs of Spain, and the Decree of 1496 in Portugal, ordered by King Manuel I. These decrees led to the mass expulsion or forced conversion of Jews and marked the beginning of the dispersion of Sephardic communities to various parts of the world. In addition to their linguistic and historical significance, Judeo-Spanish and Judeo-Portuguese played a crucial role in the cultural preservation of Sephardic communities, serving as a means of communication and the transmission of traditions. In the Eastern Mediterranean, these languages not only facilitated integration with other Jewish communities, but also kept alive the Iberian heritage among the descendants of exiles. In Hebrew, the term Sepharditas Tehorim, which literally means pure Sephardim, emerged from a misinterpretation of the Hebrew initials, Samek Tet. These initials were traditionally used alongside proper names as a blessing, meaning Sofo Tov, may your end be good, or Sin Vitin, mud and mud, a reference to humility. More recently, this term has been used in certain circles to differentiate the Sephardim in the strict sense, those who can trace their ancestry directly to the Jewish communities of the Iberian Peninsula, from the Sephardim in the broader sense, which includes other Jewish communities that adopted Sephardic religious and cultural practices over time. This distinction also gained relevance with advancements in genetic studies in the 21st century. Research has identified genetic characteristics associated with the so-called pure Sephardim, contrasting with other Jewish communities that are now included in the broader classification of Sephardim. These findings have sparked debates about identity, ancestry, and the historical connection between Iberian Jews and other Jewish populations in the diaspora. Speaking about the ancient history of Sephardic Jews on the Iberian Peninsula, the significant Jewish presence in the region is commonly attributed to the Roman period during the early centuries of the Christian era. Among the evidence from this period is an amphora found in Ibiza, marked with 2 raised Hebrew letters, suggesting possible trade between Judea and the Balearic Islands in the 1st century. Additionally, the Epistle to the Romans, attributed to the Apostle Paul, mentions his intention to visit Spain, suggesting the existence of an established Jewish community in the region by the middle of the 1st century AD. The historian Flavius Josephus reports that Herod Antipas was deposed and exiled to Spain, possibly to the location of Lugdunum Convenarum, in 39 AD. Rabbinic literature from the Amoraic period also refers to Spain as a distant land with a Jewish presence. For example, a tradition preserved by Rabbis Berechiah and Shimon bar Yochai, quoting the Tana Rabbi Meir from the 2nd century AD, states, "Do not fear, O Israel, For I am with you, from the remote lands, and your seed from the land of its captivity, from Gaul, from Spain and its neighbors." These records suggest that, even in antiquity, Spain was seen as a place with established Jewish communities. Jewish history on the Iberian Peninsula took a significant turn in 711 AD, when Muslim forces crossed the Strait of Gibraltar, coming from the Maghreb in North Africa, and launched a successful military campaign in the region. This conquest resulted in the establishment of Muslim rule over much of the peninsula, which became known as Al-Andalus. Under the new Islamic government, Jews who had faced severe persecution under the Visigothic regime welcomed the Muslim rulers with enthusiasm. The Muslims offered greater religious tolerance, allowing Jews to live and practice their faith with relative freedom. Jews and Christians under Islamic rule were designated as dhimmis, or protected peoples, a category that guaranteed the right to practice their monotheistic religions in exchange for paying a special tax. During this period, Jews were often called people of the book and considered brothers of the Arabs, coexisting harmoniously with Muslims and Berbers. Although there are narratives highlighting conflicts between Arabs and Jews throughout history, the reality in Al-Andalus was markedly different. Islamic Iberia witnessed, for the most part, around 700 years of coexistence and cooperation between these communities. This period was characterized by significant cultural and intellectual exchanges, with Jews, Arabs, and Berbers contributing together to advancements in science, philosophy, literature, and the arts. Sephardic Jews stand out for their unique characteristics, being direct descendants of the ancient Israelites and Jews. However, one of their most striking peculiarities is the ethnic and genetic mix they possess, especially with the Portuguese and Spanish. In other words, they are Jews with a strong European heritage incorporated into their DNA, giving them a hybrid identity. They are genetically mixed, carrying both Jewish and Iberian ancestry. Sephardic Jews, also known as Iberian Jews or Spanish Jews, show significant genetic traits originating from Portugal and Spain. Moreover, genetic studies indicate that in North Africa, many individuals have DNA with Berber and Arab influences. This connection strengthens the historical and genetic link between the Sephardim and other peoples of Semitic roots. Research also shows that Sephardic Jews share a close genetic relationship with other Jewish groups, such as Ashkenazim and Mizrahim. These connections are noticeable in both paternal and maternal ancestry, highlighting a mixed origin that dates back to the Middle East, the Levant region, and Europe. Many Sephardic Jews arrived in the United States during and after the period of expulsion from the Iberian Peninsula, when they were forced to leave Portugal and Spain. Traveling across the Atlantic, they sought refuge in North American territory, bringing not only their culture and traditions, but also a rich genetic heritage. This heritage includes Arab, Moorish, and Berber influences, resulting from historical coexistence in the Iberian Peninsula. For this reason, it is common for many peoples in the Americas to discover, through genetic studies, both Jewish and Arab origins in their lineages. This heritage reflects the complex and fascinating interaction of European, Semitic, and North African peoples throughout history. The term Ashkenazim originates from the biblical figure Ashkenaz, mentioned as the first son of Gomer, grandson of Japheth. Japheth, in turn, was one of Noah's sons, recognized as the patriarch of the Japhetic populations, as described in the Table of Nations in Genesis chapter 10. Gomer's name is often associated with the Cimmerians, an ancient people. The name Ashkenaz is generally understood to be derived from the Assyrian Ashkuza, which appears in cuneiform as Ashkuzai or Ishkuzai. The word Ashkenaz can be interpreted as Germanic or even Germany, which explains why Ashkenazi Jews are often called German Jews or Germanic Jews. This designation reflects both the geographical location in the region of Germania and their contact with European peoples of Germanic origin. When these Jews migrated to lands identified as Ashkenaz, they established a culture marked by interaction and integration with the local populations. Ashkenazi Jews share a historical parallel with the Sephardic Jews, another group of the Jewish diaspora. While Ashkenazim are associated with the Germanic lands, Sephardim have their roots in the Iberian Peninsula, historically referred to as Sepharad. The Ashkenazi community began to take shape in the Holy Roman Empire around the end of the first millennium. They developed a distinct language, Yiddish, which emerged around the 19th century. Yiddish combines elements of Hebrew with Germanic dialects and other influences, and was widely spoken in Northern and Eastern Europe during the Middle Ages. However, frequent persecution against Jews, especially in the late Middle Ages, led to intense migrations that helped spread Ashkenazi culture to various parts of the world. Yiddish is essentially a Judeo-German language developed from the interaction between Hebrew and Germanic dialects with influences from other European languages. For centuries, Hebrew was predominantly used as a literary and sacred language, playing a central role in religious and liturgical texts. It was only in the 20th century, with the revival of the Hebrew language, that it became widely spoken and used as a daily language, especially in Israel. Ashkenazi Jews adapted their traditions to the European context, leading to significant changes in their interpretation of Judaism, especially during the 18th and 19th centuries. During this period, many Jews who remained or returned to the historical lands of Germany faced profound cultural transformations. Under the influence of the Jewish Enlightenment movement, known as Haskalah, and the struggle for emancipation, the community underwent a process of cultural reorientation. German cities, with their intellectual and cultural vibrancy, played a crucial role in this process. During this period of transition, many Ashkenazim gradually abandoned Yiddish, the traditional Judeo-German language, in favor of German, seeking greater integration with the surrounding society. This change also led to the development of new forms of religious practice and cultural identities, marking the beginning of modernization in European Judaism. Over the centuries, Ashkenazi Jews made notable contributions to various fields of knowledge and European culture. Their achievements in philosophy, literature, art, music, science, and academic studies left a lasting legacy, shaping both Jewish identity and the cultural history of Europe. The proportion of Ashkenazi Jews relative to the global Jewish population underwent significant changes over the centuries. In the 11th century, they represented about 3% of the global Jewish population. However, this proportion increased substantially, reaching approximately 92% in 1930, near their peak population. Unfortunately, this population was drastically reduced during the Holocaust, one of the greatest tragedies in history, which occurred during World War II, resulted in the death of about 6 million Jews, deeply affecting nearly every Jewish family in Europe. In 1933, before the war, the global Jewish population was estimated at 15.3 million people. However, the Holocaust drastically altered this demographic landscape. Israeli demographer and statistician Sergio Della Pergola estimated that by the year 2000, Ashkenazi Jews represented about 65% of the global Jewish population. Other estimates suggest this proportion was even higher, ranging between 70% and 75%. In 2013, the Ashkenazi population was estimated to be between 10 and 11.2 million individuals, indicating a gradual recovery, though still far from the pre-World War II numbers. Various genetic studies conducted on the Ashkenazi Jewish population have revealed important aspects of their ancestry. These studies show that Ashkenazim have Levantine and Semitic roots, originating from the Middle East and the ancient Israelites. At the same time, there is a notable European contribution to their genetic composition, resulting from centuries of staying and interacting with local populations on the European continent. This mixed ancestry reflects both the preservation of a Jewish identity over time and the influence of the European cultures and societies in which Ashkenazi Jews lived. After the Jewish diasporas, genetic studies have demonstrated that Ashkenazi Jews possess significant European genetic influence, with predominant origins in southern and northern Europe. According to many of these studies, The European genetic mix in Ashkenazim occurred primarily in a matrilineal fashion, meaning through the maternal lines. This suggests that in ancient times, Jews who settled in European regions often married local women, resulting in a predominant European contribution through the mothers. However, like other Jewish groups, such as the Sephardim and Mizrahim, Ashkenazim have their ancestral roots in the ancient Israelites and Hebrews. They descend from the populations that inhabited the historical kingdoms of Israel and Judah, reinforcing their connection to the Middle East. Genetic studies indicate that Ashkenazi Jews share a significant amount of ancestry with other Jewish groups, deriving most of their origins from Semitic populations of the Levant region. Therefore, the genetic composition of Ashkenazim reflects a historical fusion between Levantine ancestry, which is common to all Jewish groups, and European influence acquired over centuries of staying in Europe. This process of intermarriage shaped their unique genetic identity, while they maintained cultural and religious traditions that reinforced their cohesion as a community. In addition to their roots in ancient Israel, the origin of the Ashkenazi Jews as a distinct community remains unknown, giving rise to various theories. It is known, however, that the first Jewish communities in Europe began to emerge around the 4th century BCE. At that time, Jewish colonies settled in southern Europe, covering regions such as the Aegean Islands, Greece, and Italy. The Jewish migration from ancient Israel occurred due to a combination of factors, including both the search for better opportunities and the need to escape conflicts, persecutions, and instability. This migratory movement was driven by wars and internal difficulties, but also by commercial and social attractions in the new regions. There are records indicating the presence of Jews in certain European areas, particularly in Greece, as early as the 2nd century BCE, when small groups or Jewish communities began to establish themselves. Voluntary migration to southern Europe intensified after the conquests of Alexander the Great, which created favorable conditions for trade and cultural interaction in the eastern Mediterranean. During the Hellenistic period, many Jews migrated to Greek settlements in search of economic prosperity. Later, during the Roman period, the Jewish migratory flow to southern Europe became even more significant, reflecting the attraction of the economic and commercial opportunities of the time. These migrations, driven by economic and social factors, played a crucial role in the formation of Jewish communities that later contributed to the emergence of Ashkenazi Jews as a distinct cultural and religious identity. For much of the Roman period, many Jews did not have access to full citizenship, a situation that only changed in 212 CE when Emperor Caracalla granted this right to all free peoples of the empire. Until the reign of Julian in 363 CE, Jews were also required to pay a special tax. By the end of the Roman Empire, there was some freedom for Jews to form cultural and religious networks and engage in various local economic activities. However, the situation began to deteriorate when Christianity was declared the official religion of Rome and Constantinople in 380 CE. From that point, Jews faced increasing marginalization and Catholic persecutions intensified, deeply affecting their communities. Moving on to the relationship with Sephardic Jews, often described as their brothers, the relationship between Ashkenazi and Sephardic Jews was sometimes marked by tensions and mutual prejudices. Arrogance, snobbery, and claims of racial superiority exacerbated these conflicts. Both groups frequently claimed greater genetic and cultural proximity to the ancient Jews, basing their claims on physical characteristics, cultural traits, and religious traditions. These divisions became more evident in Israeli society after the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. Sephardic Jews, primarily from North Africa and the Middle East, were often treated as second-class citizens by Ashkenazi Jews, who dominated the political and social scene. This discrimination led to the emergence of protest movements, such as the Israeli Black Panthers, founded by Saadia Marciano, a Moroccan Jewish woman, who sought equality and social justice for Sephardic Jews. Research conducted in 2010 pointed to a common genetic ancestry among all Jewish populations, revealing deep connections between them. During certain historical periods, Ashkenazi communities even welcomed a considerable number of Sephardim, facilitating a cultural and genetic fusion between the two groups. However, today they remain quite distinct. Ashkenazi and Sephardic Jews maintain their own identities, with well-defined boundaries between the two groups. One integration that gained prominence, especially in Israel, was the cultural and ethnic mixing between Mizrahi Jews, often considered the most genetically pure, and Sephardic Jews, who occupy second place in this genetic perspective. This interaction resulted in a significant fusion both culturally and genetically, reinforcing the diversity among Jewish populations in the contemporary context. Focusing on the genetics of Ashkenazi Jews, studies confirm that they have Israelite ancestry and, therefore, Jewish blood. However, the genetic history of this group reveals significant intermingling with European populations, mainly occurring in antiquity. It is estimated that these marriages, particularly with women from southern and other regions of Europe, contributed to a high proportion of European genetics in Ashkenazi Jews. Studies indicate that, on average, Ashkenazi Jews have about 60% or more European DNA, while the percentage of ancient Jewish ancestry in their genome is around 40%. These numbers, however, can vary considerably among individuals, reflecting the complexity of migratory dynamics and cultural interactions throughout history. Although Ashkenazi Jews are a more mixed group, just like Sephardic Jews, they maintain a distinct Jewish identity. However, Sephardic Jews carry a greater proportion of ancient Jewish genetics in their DNA. Even so, Ashkenazi Jews continue to be Jews. Interestingly, they currently form the largest group of Jews in Israel, followed by Sephardim and Mizrahim. Today, Ashkenazi Jews are undoubtedly the most widely recognized Jewish group. Their physical characteristics often make them easily identifiable, especially in contrast with Sephardic Jews. However, there is a group that remains almost unknown to most people, the Mizrahi Jews. In the visual comparison we present, you can see the striking distinction between a Mizrahi Jew, whose lineage has remained in the Middle East without significant genetic mixing with Europeans, and an Ashkenazi Jew, whose ancestry includes European influences over the centuries. This difference not only highlights the diversity within the Jewish people, but also underscores how distinct the paths of these groups have been. Mizrahi Jews, known in Hebrew as Yehudei Mizrah, are the true Eastern Jews, direct descendants of the ancient biblical Israelites. Unlike Ashkenazim and Sephardim, who migrated to Europe and other parts of the world, the Mizrahim remained in the heart of the Middle East, preserving customs, traditions, and an identity deeply rooted in the history of their homeland. Their migrations, when they occurred, were limited to neighboring regions, including parts of the Maghreb and some areas of Asia. Although often forgotten or scarcely recognized, the Mizrahi Jews carry with them a heritage that goes directly back to biblical times, serving as a living link to the ancient Israelites who inhabited the Holy Land thousands of years ago. The term Mizrahim is, above all, a socio-political and ethnic designation that arose after the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. In Hebrew, Mizrahim means Orientals, and in its contemporary usage, it specifically refers to Jews from the Middle East and the Maghreb. In the modern context, this classification encompasses Mashriki Jews, from the Arabic Masharqi, meaning Eastern, a group that historically lived in countries like Yemen, Iraq, Turkey, Syria, Lebanon, Kurdistan, Iran, and Egypt. In addition to them, this identity also includes Jews from the Maghreb, who lived for centuries in Algeria, Tunisia, and Morocco. What makes this categorization even more interesting is the fact that before the creation of the State of Israel, Jews from these regions did not identify as a distinct subgroup within Judaism. In the Middle East, and even in pre-1948 Palestine, Jewish communities were recognized according to their localities or specific traditions, without the need for a unifying label like Mizrahim. It was only with the establishment of the new state, and the subsequent need to classify its diverse Jewish populations that this identity was consolidated. Thus, Mizrahi Jews are not only an ethnic group, but also the product of a recent historical and political framing, which seeks to group under a single term those who, for millennia, lived as Eastern Jews amidst Arab and Persian cultures. For Jews from the Middle East and the Maghreb, identity was clear. They were simply Jews. Before the creation of the State of Israel and the imposition of socio-political categories such as Mizrahim, there was no need for such distinctions. Each Jewish community was recognized by its locality or tradition rather than as part of a separate group within the Jewish people. Interestingly, Mizrahi Jews shared many cultural and aesthetic similarities with Sephardic Jews. Their clothing, customs, and even certain aspects of their religious traditions had more in common with Sephardic Jews than with Ashkenazi Jews. Sephardic Jews, who were expelled from Spain and Portugal during the Inquisition, as well as those who lived in Al-Andalus, the region of the Iberian Peninsula under Arab rule for centuries, absorbed many cultural influences from the peoples of the Middle East and North Africa. This led them to preserve, in many ways, a way of life reminiscent of the ancient Israelites. This, in no way, diminishes the importance of Ashkenazi Jews, who are also legitimate descendants of the people of Israel and played a crucial role in the preservation and evolution of Judaism. However, when looking at historical, linguistic, and cultural similarities, it becomes clear that Sephardic Jews had a greater affinity with Mizrahi Jews than with Ashkenazi Jews. Both groups, living among Arab and Islamic societies, maintain traditions that date back to biblical times, making them a living reflection of the heritage of the ancient Israelites. The history of the Mizrahi Jews dates back to one of the oldest and continuous Jewish lineages rooted in the heart of the Middle East. Their diaspora began around the 6th century BCE, when Babylon, under the reign of Nebuchadnezzar II, destroyed the first temple in Jerusalem and took a large part of the Jewish population into captivity. This event, known as the Babylonian exile, marked the beginning of the dispersion of the Jews beyond the land of Israel. While some remained in Babylon, establishing one of the most influential Jewish communities of antiquity, others fled to Egypt, where there had already been a significant Jewish presence since the time of the prophet Jeremiah. Over the centuries, the diaspora expanded further into the Middle East and the Maghreb, giving rise to the communities we now know as Mizrahim. In the Maghreb, Jews settled among Semitic peoples, such as the Berbers and Arabs, who had already inhabited the region for time immemorial. Additionally, some Jewish communities settled in Persian lands, Yemen, and various parts of Asia Minor. North Africa, in particular, has always been an ethnic melting pot, where Semitic and Indo-European peoples, descendants of Japheth, coexisted since ancient times. Although there were Hamitic tribes of African origin living in the region, the cultural and population predominance in North Africa has always been linked to Semitic and Indo-European peoples. Historical evidence, such as ancient murals from Libya and other parts of the Maghreb, shows human figures that clearly differ from the Cushitic African peoples, displaying features closer to those of the peoples of the Middle East and the Mediterranean. This reinforces the idea that the Jews who migrated to this region encountered a population whose ethnic and cultural composition had already been strongly influenced by Semitic peoples, which may have contributed to the preservation of Jewish identity in the Maghreb over the centuries. With the expansion of Islam in the 7th century CE, Jews living under Muslim rule were classified as dhimmis. The term dhimmi, dhumai, referred to non-Muslims who lived in Islamic territories, granting them the right to practice their religions, but under certain restrictions and a lower legal status. Muslims recognized Jews as people of the book, al-Kitab, a title that also included Christians because they shared a monotheistic tradition rooted in the scriptures. Due to this recognition and the historical kinship between Arabs and Jews, both belonging to the Semitic branch, the Jews were allowed to maintain their religious practices. However, this tolerance came with limitations. They were required to pay the jizya, a special tax imposed on non-Muslims, and were prohibited from holding certain political or military positions. An interesting aspect of this relationship is that despite their subordinate status, there were periods of relatively peaceful coexistence between Jews and Muslims. In some regions, such as Islamic Spain, Al-Andalus, and parts of the Ottoman Empire, Jews found refuge and even thrived compared to the more hostile treatment they received in Christian Europe. This ambiguous coexistence may have been facilitated by the perception of a common ancestry. According to biblical tradition, both Arabs and Jews are descendants of Abraham, the Arabs through Ishmael and the Jews through Isaac. This ancestral connection may have helped maintain a certain level of respect between the two communities, even though Jews were always in a secondary social position within the Islamic world. Throughout history, Jews in the Maghreb formed vibrant and active communities, leaving a significant mark on the societies in which they lived. From large cities to small villages, they played essential roles in trade, craftsmanship, and the cultural development of the region. Their contributions spanned from jewelry making, weaving, and medicine to finance, making them crucial figures in the local economy. Maghrebi Jewish communities developed a unique identity, blending ancient Jewish influences with local traditions. Their religious practices gained distinctive characteristics, reflected in customs, cuisine, music, and even clothing, which often incorporated elements typical of Berber and Arab cultures. This fusion of influences created a rich and distinct cultural heritage, still observable in the descendants of the Maghrebi Jewish diaspora. The relationship between Jews and Muslims in the Maghreb varied over time and depending on the political context. In periods of stability, Jews were able to thrive and even collaborate with Muslim society, holding prominent positions as merchants, interpreters, and advisors. In other times, however, they faced persecution, discrimination, and restrictions imposed by Islamic authorities. Depending on the ruler in power, policies could range from relative tolerance to severe oppression. Despite these adversities, many Jewish communities in the Maghreb managed to preserve their cultural and religious identity over the centuries. Even with political and social changes, they maintained their customs and traditions, passing down their heritage from generation to generation. This demonstrates not only their resilience, but also the depth of the Mizrahi Jews' connection to their ancestral roots. Though Jews in the Middle East and the Maghreb had deep ties to the regions they lived in, they were recognized as a distinct community. In the Arab world, for example, even though they absorbed local cultural influences, adopting variants of Arabic and developing their own versions of cuisine, they did not incorporate Arab identity. On the contrary, Jews from these regions, even those with converted ancestors, identified as part of the Jewish people as a whole, preserving their heritage as descendants of the ancient Israelites. Regarding the languages spoken by Mizrahi Jews in ancient times and today, the native language of this group was Aramaic. Since ancient times, Aramaic has been the language of the Israelite people. For example, Abraham spoke Aramaic, as he was from Aram and Paddan Aram, regions where this language was predominant. His son Isaac, upon marrying Rebekah, a woman from Paddan Aram, also spoke Aramaic. Thus Jacob, known as the Wandering Aramean, spoke this language and had Aramean ancestry. Aramaic has accompanied the Jews from the time of Abraham to the present day. As part of the Semitic language subfamily, ancient Aramaic presents specific varieties identified as Jewish dialects, as it appears in key Jewish texts such as the Talmud and the Zohar, in addition to being present in various ritual recitations such as the Kaddish. Historically, Aramaic was the predominant language in Talmudic debates within yeshivas, as many rabbinic texts combine Hebrew and Aramaic. In Arab regions like Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, Yemen, Jordan, Lebanon, Iraq, and Syria, however, Mizrahi Jews predominantly spoke Arabic. Several significant philosophical and religious works by Jews from the Maghreb and the Middle East were written in Arabic using an adapted Hebrew alphabet. In addition to Aramaic and Arabic, in some regions of the Middle East, such as Iran, Mizrahi Jews began speaking a version of Persian known as Jewish Persian or Judeo-Persian, a fusion of Persian and Aramaic. Regarding the genetics of Mizrahi Jews, it is interesting to note that they show a considerable genetic proximity to the ancient Israelites. This is reflected in their physical characteristics, with distinct Semitic features in their faces. Compared to other Jewish groups, such as Ashkenazis, who have significant genetic admixture with Europeans, including Germans and other European peoples, Mizrahi Jews have a genetic constitution more faithful to Semitic origins. This explains the presence of blonde, red-haired and light-eyed Jews among Ashkenazis who do not exhibit as obvious Semitic genetics. When analyzing Mizrahi Jews, one can observe typical Semitic physical traits from the Middle East. Among them are prominent arched noses, thick beards, pronounced dark circles under the eyes, and skin tones ranging from beige to yellowish, easily acquiring a tanned hue under sun exposure. Their dark hair and brown eyes, combined with more slender faces, show striking similarities to other Semitic peoples from the region, such as Arabs, Bedouins, and other Middle Eastern groups. Mizrahi Jews are often mistakenly classified as Arab Jews, an inaccurate designation because, although they share some cultural and physical traits with Arabs, their identity is Jewish. Moreover, their genetic ancestry, in many cases, is even more preserved compared to other Jewish groups. Regarding the maternal mitochondrial lineage of Mizrahi Jews, a study conducted by Behar in 2008 brought significant findings. Approximately 43% of Mizrahi Jews from Iraq and other parts of the Middle East exhibited a significant maternal founding event, with 58.6% of the total variation in their mitochondrial DNA tracing back to a female ancestor from the Levant. In Yemen, research indicates that about 42% of the direct maternal lineages of the Mizrahi Jewish population can be traced back to 5 female ancestors, 4 of whom originate from the Middle East. Genetic studies offer interesting perspectives when comparing Mizrahi Jews to other Jewish groups, such as Ashkenazis. In Ashkenazi Jews, the genetic heritage of European origin mainly comes from the maternal lineage through mitochondrial DNA, while the paternal lineage maintains Semitic roots in the Levant and the Middle East. In contrast, Mizrahi Jews have both matrilineal and patrilineal Semitic ancestry from the region, reinforcing their genetic continuity within the Jewish ethnicity. When it comes to the paternal lineage of Mizrahi Jews from Iraq and Yemen, there is a great similarity with the lineages of Ashkenazi and Sephardic Jews, all linked to the Levant of the ancient Middle East, as well as other regions. Thanks for following along this far. I'd love to hear from you. Were you already familiar with these insights on genetics, language, and culture of the main Jewish branches in Israel and around the world? Share your thoughts in the comments. May God bless you, and see you soon.